All right, everyone, welcome back into another NFL DFS video. Going to be breaking down the Week 13 lineup builder here for you guys, where I give you guys my core plays, my favorite stacks, values, some ownership phase, and leverage talk. And we're also going to give you guys my last look build, but also what the 9 to 5 lineup builder is telling us are the top builds. Let's go in and get into it. So I actually want to start this video off with the first look lineup that I put out to you guys, and I don't think much has really changed. It's kind of an interesting week in that regard. Now, I do think the overall dynamic of the slate has maybe changed, but I think this still ends up being a pretty solid build overall. Kenneth Walker, more of a GPP only play, but a high upside play. The Minnesota Vikings are going to be starting a rookie quarterback in Max Brosmer, taking his first real NFL action. And so I kind of would expect a more run-heavy approach there for the Seahawks, and it wouldn't be surprising to see more of a ceiling game out of Kenneth Walker there. So I think he makes for actually a pretty good ownership leverage play. And if we look at his ownership, I would say it's basically correct, guys. He's coming in about 13% projected own, but again, it wouldn't be surprising to see him have a better game. Now, another player that's coming in pretty low owned is going to be Kyren Williams, and I'm actually pretty shocked by this one. Sure, he doesn't project to be the best value. Okay, I understand that. But at the same time, I think he's going to end up with a bigger workload than really what the data is kind of suggesting here. Like, the weakness of the Carolina Panthers defense has been the running back position, not really throwing the football. They're 10-point favorites. If they are going to be 10-point favorites, I actually think Kyren Williams has a good chance of scoring a touchdown in this game. And if you add on a touchdown here, you can get him closer to about 17 points. And so, sure, he's priced at probably correctly, and that's part of the issue, but I think the ownership ends up being a little bit too low for him. Now, all in all, I'm not probably ending up on him now in my cash lineups and in kind of my main lineups. I do think eating the chalk on Devon Achane, who's coming in as one of the higher owned running backs on the slate, I think that ends up making a lot of sense. That's kind of the route I'm going. And even getting to CMC, Bijan Robinson at their ownerships, I also think is like the correct way to go. That's kind of the issue with this slate, is like, there's not a big stance to make. We can get some leverage on some running back plays, including, I thought the player that would be extreme chalk is Devin Neal. Okay, he's only a 2.3x value, which is a little bit surprising. I think he does have a pretty high floor in the receiving game. We have him projected for about 3.5 receptions, about 20 receiving yards. So that ends up being a pretty good floor, about 5 DFS points just receiving the football. And he gets a game against Miami that should end up being a pretty good matchup. And so I really like into Devin Neal, actually. I'm not expecting anything big, but kind of what I want to do on the slate, because we're getting a lot of receiver value, a lot of tight end value, is kind of punt to those spots, and then we can pay up for the studs when we're finishing our build. So Devin Neal, to me, becomes a very intriguing play that will allow us to pay up for other studs. Whether those studs end up being CMC, Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane is one I'm happy to get to. Again, I already mentioned, like, I like Kyren Williams. I think Kenneth Walker is going to be in for a good leverage spot. Then one other player that I also think is in for a good leverage spot is going to be the running back for the Houston Texans, Woody Marks, who has now played over 70% of the snaps 2 straight weeks in a row. We saw him get 16 and 18 carries over the last 2 weeks. We want him to be a little bit more involved in the receiving game, but all in all, this offense should end up getting a little bit better with CJ Stroud expected to be back. And also on the other side of it, guys, Daniel Jones is battling a leg injury. Apparently he broke something in his leg, and like, there's clips going around social media showing him kind of struggling. And I'm just like, okay, control this game, Houston. Okay, pass when you need to. But like, I think the workload for Woody Marks should be around at least 16 rush attempts. And so I actually like him there as well. Obviously, what we're hoping for is going to be a touchdown out of him, but I think those running back plays all make a decent amount of sense. Now, my biggest issue with that is I think one of the starting points this week for the receiver spot is actually going to be Nico Collins. He is coming in off of a disappointing game against the Buffalo Bills where other players were just more involved. Jaden Higgins ended up going off in that game. And he is actually one of my favorite values on the slate. Once again, like, it's just strange that he didn't see his price increase at all. 9, 7, and 7 targets over the last 3 weeks. And it's not like that's a mistake, guys. He ended up playing 70% of the routes at a 59% snap share in that game. Christian Kirk, who was heavily involved in that game, only played on 32% of the snaps. Okay, Jaden Higgins over the last 3 weeks, guys, has seen 58, 61, and 58% of the snaps. Sure, that's not elite, but at the same time, that's not bad. And to get him in a pretty good matchup at this cheap price tag, I think that ends up being a great value. And actually, one of my favorite stacks for this week is getting to him and CJ Stroud with Nico Collins. Now, in that build, you obviously would not be getting to Woody Marks, but I think that ends up being a pretty good sneaky stack. Now, another receiver play that I like a decent amount, just given the fact that I think he has a pretty solid floor, is going to be Jalen Waddle. The targets have been there for him. He's really only had a couple of disappointing games thus far this season, especially since Tyreek Hill has been out. I actually think this game against the Saints could end up being a pretty fun spot. Chris Olave in that same game is a little bit appealing, assuming that he ends up playing. I'm fully expecting him to be active in this game, and if he does, you expect a high target share out of him. If he were to end up sitting, guys, Devon Valet would definitely be a little bit too cheap at his price tag. He already is a little bit too cheap, honestly. He's going to play about 70% of the snaps, end up with 7 targets last week in a tough matchup, and Miami is presenting to be a tough matchup, although it's not terrible. Like he's certainly too cheap there as well. Tyler Shaw, for what it's worth, you could end up getting away with the sneaky game stack here as well. We're getting actually a lot of cheap quarterback value to the point where it does make sense to do a little bit of a stack. And what's interesting about last week, guys, is he had 2 separate chances to score touchdowns from QB sneaks and was unable to convert. If he had done that, I think we'd be talking about him completely differently. Like you give him 12 more points, right? And people are like, oh, he put up 20 points after putting up 19. The conversation is completely different about him. And he has looked improved. And so I really don't mind him. And again, that ends up being a little bit of a sneaky game stack. The issue is we have these cheap stacks that we can run out that make a lot of logical sense. And then we're paying up for the running backs that are going to be in some difficult spots. But again, I don't mind that. And then really another cheap stack that I think we have as well in regards to the receivers is going to be looking at the Tennessee Titans. Jameer DK, a player that I mentioned last week, was like a core value play for me. And again, I think we're looking at him, guys. 7 targets, 5 receptions, 44 receiving yards. Just continues to look impressive. Had a touchdown, returning a punt as well. Ayu Manor is going to be back in this game, most likely. That's a little bit of a concern in regards to just how much of a focal point he'll be in this offense. But at the same time, I do think he ends up being a little bit too cheap, and I actually really like the idea of getting to him. And I said last week, guys, prior to the game, that I thought Cam Ward had been improving each and every week, and that he had been playing better than what we saw in the box score. It's actually funny. There's like a viral tweet going on X about, oh, we don't need to watch film. The data tells us enough. I'm like, and it was in regards to Cam Ward. And it's just funny that like literally prior to last week, I literally basically said the opposite of what this person was trying to say. It's like Cam Ward has looked much better than what the data is telling us, and he goes off and has that awesome game against the Seahawks. I'm like, it's pretty funny, the timing of that. But anyways, he did look good, and he does continue to improve. Really, he just needs his players to come through, which is what happened for him last week. And now he gets a pretty strong matchup against the Jaguars. I really like the idea of getting to some of these cheap stacks, and I think one of them will at least pop for us. And Cam Ward with DK is one that makes sense. And if you guys are looking to do that stack, I actually do like getting to Gunnar Helm, who gets a phenomenal matchup against the Jaguars. I'm expecting him to play about 60% of the snaps. 2 weeks in a row now, we've seen him get over 5 targets, and it's a cheap way to punt at the tight end position. Now, we could easily pay up if we want to Trey McBride, but for now, I'm kind of looking at him. Again, we're going to have lots of opportunities to pay up if we want to, but for now, he's looking like a good value. Let's finish out the receiver spot with calling out 2 more values that I like, guys, because it's simple. Like, I'm fine with JSN. It's a kind of a tough matchup, but not really. Same thing with Puka. Like, sure, those are teams that you're kind of running the football against more so. And maybe the Vikings actually know how to, make Sam Darnold struggle. That could easily end up happening. I actually do prefer Puka over JSN this week, which is kind of strange, especially considering price. I think Puka is a little bit better. But like, I don't have to put much of a thought into that. Like, I think if you can pay up for them, you should. Same thing with the running backs. But we are getting 2 other good values, guys. One of them is going to be Jalen Coker, who in this game against the Rams, they are expected to be playing from behind. And I think he's going to be a safe play. Like, I don't think he's necessarily going to be a slate breaker, but if you're looking for like a cheap 5+ DFS points, and again, like you typically wouldn't want that, but I think that's a good floor. And for him at 3.4, that's not a terrible thing to target. And then maybe you get lucky with a big play or a touchdown. The thing is, I think we're getting 3 receptions out of him. And then John Mechie as well, guys. He was someone. Sorry, I mentioned Jameer DK as a core value play last week. It was John Mechie. DK, I mentioned he was just priced up a little bit too much to be that for us. So apologies for that. But John Mechie was someone I did mention as a core value play last week. And he is kind of that again, although the matchup is a little bit more difficult here against the Falcons to the point where I wouldn't want to say that, where it's not like a clear and obvious value. But if we're talking about really good values that we want to be going out of our way to target, I would say he's number 1. In regards to players priced under 4K, at the receiver spot, he is still number one. Okay, playing 80% of the snaps and again 7 targets, 6 receptions, 65 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Obviously, the touchdown's what made him, but still very solid play overall. And for what's worth, guys, Mitchell was heavily involved there for the Jets as well. Basically played the same amount of snaps, had the same targets, not the same outcome, but still had 42 receiving yards. I mean, he's athletic. We know that. He's still probably a little bit too cheap. Now, in regards to how the data sees this, everyone's kind of punting as well. Like JSN is the chalkiest, then Puka, then Chris Olave, then Waddle, then Nico. So it makes sense. Now, Michael Wilson would be someone I would kind of view as a core play if Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up being ruled out in this game. I'm just not expecting that. But we are seeing everyone's just kind of punting here, which, again, I think makes sense. In regards to value, Mechie ranks out as one of the better values. Then does Jaden Higgins. And then IU Manor, for what it's worth, if he ends up being active in this game, he is pretty appealing at 3.7 as well. You could easily go Cam Ward and then 2 of DK, IU Manor, and then also Gunnar Helm. And you are looking at an extremely cheap stack that could potentially put up, let's just say 50 points combined. And then you're paying up for your other studs like Puka Nacua or something like that. That ends up working out a decent amount. And that's kind of been my strategy for this week, in case you guys haven't caught that. And then for tight ends, I do think we are just trying to pay up for Trey McBride, although he's starting to get priced up a little bit too much. I could see Dalton Kincaid go off and have a pretty solid game. Jawan Johnson ends up in a pretty good spot here, guys, with really how banged up the Saints are. I would expect him to continue to do what he's doing. I would give him a base of about 5 targets, so I don't hate him. Kyle Pitts ended up playing like 95% of the snaps, so we can't really ignore that. Dalton Schultz, somewhat appealing. Brenton Strange came in and instantly looked very good in that offense. But then we have AJ Barnard priced a little bit too cheap and a good matchup for him. And that's honestly why I find myself just trying to punt to like Gunnar Helm, because I could talk myself into a bunch of plays. And obviously, if you're doing stacks, you're going to do that as well. But other than Gunnar Helm, in regards to like a value play that I'm going out of my way to target, the only tight end that I'm going out of my way to target has been Harold Fannin. He is someone that does have a pretty high floor. The Browns should be playing from behind. He ended up playing 90% of the snaps, 86% route share, 6 targets. But even that doesn't feel like a lock and load to like go off. And again, that's kind of why I'm defaulting to punting to Gunnar Helm. DST wise, I really don't care. Not much analysis here, guys. Again, maybe the Vikings know how to get to Sam Darnold. Obviously Sam Darnold has had a random bad game here or there throughout his career, or I should say over the last year and a half now. It wouldn't be surprising to see the Vikings get after him. You guys know my strategy is to go to the lowest price DST that's not going to go negative. And I actually kind of think that's the Titans, although the Jaguars are getting back Brian Thomas Jr. and now are getting Brendan Strange back, so that's not foolproof. But still, I don't hate them. But you guys see what I mean. We have about almost $7,000 left over. We could easily afford to pay up for really whoever we want. We could get to Josh Allen, who's the easy quarterback play on this slate. If you want to pay up for him, you can. But then we also have Jacoby Brissett, who I do value as like the first click quarterback-wise. But if you had the salary left over, pay up for Josh Allen. And if you don't have the salary for Jacoby Brissett, don't mind it. You have CJ Stroud in a decent spot. Again, very easy to stack him. You have Tyler Shaw. Again, I don't want to oversell Tyler Shaw or anything. I just like the logic around stacking him. Look better. Cam Ward's at a cheap price tag. And so there's like just viable options we can go with at the quarterback position for cheap. But either we're playing Jacoby Brissett or we are playing Josh Allen. Those are the 2 quarterback priority plays. And when we look at the ownership, that's somewhat of what people are seeing. We are getting Tyrod Taylor somewhat high owned. Again, I would probably say it should be closer to about 25% Josh Allen, 25% Brissett, and then we can get to some of the values. But overall, the industry's basically seeing it the same as I am. And so let's finish this first build here for you guys, or I guess last build. So we have about 6.6 left over. We can get to Puka pretty easily, feel pretty comfortably. Flex wise, it really depends on what we're trying to do here. Again, I'm fine getting to Kyron Williams. I'm fine getting to like Woody Marks. Kamani Valdal is a little bit interesting with Amari Hampton expected to sit. Kenneth Walker, again, is a very strong GPP upside type play. Or we could just punt at the receiver position. We could get to Higgins or Mechie and feel pretty comfortable doing that. I'm fine with either. I'll go with Mechie for this one. We have 7.2 left over, guys. That's a ton of salary left over. Maybe we get to Nico. Maybe we get to Waddle. We'll go Nico for this build. And so you guys see a pretty decent build overall. Obviously, if we have Josh Allen, we would prefer to stack. You could get to Shakir, you could get to Kincaid, but he's also someone that works out separately. And then here's kind of my final thoughts in regards to a lineup that I was able to make that I felt pretty comfortable with. I was able to get to Devon Achane, Josh Allen, CMC, and Nico Collins all in a build together. And then I went to Higgins and DK. Again, you could go to Mechie. I'd be fine with that, but a pretty solid build here as well. And then, guys, just ended up doing a little bit of a general run here. Just did a quarterback stack with pass catcher just to see what the lineup builder was spitting out to us as some of the top builds. I will say Breece Hall and Gentry, I'm fine with. I think they have a pretty high floor. Both of them, the offense is kind of revolving around them. I like some of the other plays a little bit better for their upside. I'm fine with it. It makes sense. But this ended up getting to Waddle, Olave, Mitchell. Went up Strange and Trevor Lawrence as a stack. Interesting there. And then Brock Bowers. I guess I'm okay with that. Michael Mayer is out, so that should mean that Brock Bowers is fine. Shaw. I went with a Shaw lineup. That's interesting. Chris Olave stack, CJ Stroud. So it is trying to get to some of those value stacks, which I do find somewhat interesting there. But that's going to do it for this video. I appreciate you guys being here. If you guys would like access to that lineup builder or the DraftKings cheat sheet, head on over to 9to5sports.com, guys. That's available on the website for a low monthly cost of $10 a month. Appreciate you guys being here. Good luck. And as always, let's keep cashing.